Daf Yomi Tractate Menachot, page 41, starting on the bottom of page 40b. The Gemara asks, what is meant by a cloak that is exempt from ritual fringes? If we say that it is referring to a cloak that is not of the size necessary to require the affixing of ritual fringes, that is difficult. But isn't it taught in a Braita with regard to a cloak that is large enough for a minor to cover his head and most of his body with it? Now we're turning to 41a on the top. והגדול יוצא בדרך הרי חייבס בציציס אין הקודם מסגס בו ישוי ובוי אף על פי שגדול יוצא בו הרי פטורו וכן עניין קיים. And an adult goes out in public on occasion while wearing it. It is required to have ritual fringes, but if it is not large enough for a minor to cover his head and most of his body with it, then even if an adult goes out in public on occasion while wearing it, it is exempt from ritual fringes. And so too with regard to diverse kinds, meaning the prohibition against wearing wool and linen together. והבינן בא מאי וכן עניין קלעים אילה וכן עניין אסור דקלעים והוענן תנן אין הרי בקלעים. And we discussed it, what is meant by and so too with regard to diverse kinds. If we say that it means and so too with regard to the prohibition of diverse kinds, that if a minor could not cover the majority of his head and body with it, the prohibition of diverse kinds does not apply. That is difficult. But didn't we learn in a Mishnah in Klayim 9.2 that there is no exemption with regard to the prohibition of diverse kinds for clothing that an adult would not wear even occasionally in public? And Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says in explanation, rather the Braita means, and so too with regard to whether a linen cloak is required to have ritual fringes. If the cloak is large enough for a minor to cover his head and most of his body with it, then it requires ritual fringes, and wearing the garment with ritual fringes is not a violation of the prohibition of diverse kinds. But if the garment is smaller than that, it is prohibited to place ritual fringes on it due to the prohibition of diverse kinds. Therefore, if one cannot explain Shmuel's statement to mean that a cloak is exempt from ritual fringes because it is too small, it is not subject to the prohibition of diverse kinds. Elo mai peturo heitin limuteles. Rather, what is meant by the statement that a cloak is exempt from ritual fringes is not subject to the prohibition of diverse kinds. Is referring to when it is referring to when a fixed ritual fringes to a garment, there are already fixed ritual fringes affixed to it, even though the second set of ritual fringes is superfluous. Nevertheless, there is no violation of the prohibition of diverse kinds. The Gemara asks, but didn't Rabbi Zera already say this one time when he stated that if one attached ritual fringes to a garment that had already had ritual fringes attached to it, and he then removed the first set of strings, the garment is fit? The Gemara answers, one was stated from the other by inference, and Rabbi Zera did not state both statements. Tanu Rabbanon, Talis Kifulo Chayeves Betzitzis, the Rabbi Shimon Poitero, the Shovin Shim Kofle V'Tofor Shechayeves. The sages taught in the Braita, a very long cloak that is folded in half is required to have ritual fringes at the fold. And Rabbi Shimon deems it exempt from ritual fringes at the fold because it is not where the corners of the garment are located. And Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis agree that if he folded it and sewed it, it is required to have ritual fringes at the fold. And the if you fold it and sold it, it is required to have ritual fringes at the fold. The Gemara challenges the one who sewed it. It is obvious that it is required to have ritual fringes at the fold. The Gemara explains no, it is necessary to state this halachah because it is referring to a case where he fastened it with pins rather than sewing in the conventional manner. Rabbi Bar Huna Ikla leve Rabbi Bar Nachman Chazida v'mikasi talis kefula v'romile chudila v'kefela ipshito v'asachut v'kamna de'reshe. The Gemara relates that Rabbi Bar Huna arrived at the house of Rava bar Rav Nachman. And he saw that Rava bar Rav Nachman was wearing a cloak that was folded and that he had affixed strings to it on the corners of the fold. The cloak unfolded and the string that had been on the corner of the fold now came and settled near his head, meaning in the middle of the cloak, as the two sides of the cloak were in the front and back of Rava bar Nachman. Amar le lav hainu kanav tichas v'rachmana be'raiso osa shadis kaseh glima achariti. Rava bar Huna said to Rava bar Nachman, this is not the corner of the garment that the Merciful One writes about in the Torah. Rava bar Nachman went and threw it off, and he covered himself with a different cloak. Amar le mi savata chavis kaveru chavis talisu zil ramile. Rabba bar Huna said to Rava bar Rav Nachman, do you hold that ritual fringes are an obligation incumbent upon the man? That is not so. Rather, it is an obligation that pertains to every cloak that one owns. Therefore, go and affix ritual fringes to it properly. Lema Messiah le Chasidim Rishonim Kevan she'ogu bo shalosh hayu mazinin bo zecheles shani Chasidim michamer nafshayu. The Gemara suggests, let us say that Rashi supports the opinion of Rabbi bar Huna. It is told of the early generations of pious men that once they weave 3 finger breadths of the length of the garment, they would affix the white and sky blue strings to the first 2 corners, even though the garment was not yet ready to be worn. This seems to prove that there is an obligation to affix ritual fringes to all the cloaks in one's possession, even if he is not currently wearing them. The Gemara rejects this proof. The pious men were different, as they would act stringently with themselves. Therefore, one cannot adduce the actual requirement from their behavior. Upliga di malacho me'achash kechele katina de mikase sadino. Omele katina sadina bikaita v'sarabala basitva titi chen cheles mate aleha. The Gemara notes that this disagrees with what an angel said. As an angel found Rav Katina when he was wearing a linen cloak. An angel? Where did an angel come? Alright, which is exempt from ritual fringes. The angel said to him, Katina, if you wear a linen cloak in the summer, and a coat, which is sarbala, which has only 2 corners, and is therefore also exempt from ritual fringes in the winter, what will become of the ritual fringes of sky blue wool? As a result, you will never fulfill the mitzvah. Amar le'an anashisu ese amale bizman digaritcha Anshinun. Rav Katina said to him, do you punish us? Why is he talking to an angel and saying if you punish us? This is very strange. Why is he asking the angel if you punish us? Rav Katina said to him, do you punish us even for this is a good question here. Why is Rav Katina asking an angel if he meets out the punishment for a mitzvah? Doesn't only God reward and punish? Why is he talking to an angel about punishment? This is a big question. People that are not really, Rav Katina said to him, do you punish us even for failing to fulfill a positive mitzvah? The angel said to him, at a time when there is divine anger and judgment, we punish. Even for a failure to fulfill a positive mitzvah. We punish. The angel is talking. Maybe it's the angel of the Lord that's speaking. It just says an angel found of Katina. An angel. We don't know which angel. It's a good question, and it's a question you can't really ask people, because in these places they would go, It's a good kasha. Vind kasha stabilis. Vind kasha stabilis. You know what I mean? It's not gonna. You can't ask these questions, but it's good to mark it down. You know what I mean? Vind kasha stabilis. Did this really happen? It's really there's a lot here. I'm just reading it, but here we have the Feres in the Gemara. Rav Katina is talking to an angel and asking, "Do you punish us?" And in his response, in the dialogue, the angel said, "At a time that there is divine anger, we punish you. We." It opens up a whole new way of thinking. I mean, given at the hand of angels, you have Nasa Adam Mitzalmenu, all these thoughts come to mind. It's a big question. How do I keep track of these questions? Gemara Menachot 41a. It's unbelievable. This is a good question. Maybe I'll call this series "These Are the Questions." Has a numerical value of. So here, okay, let's continue. Even if failing to fulfill a positive mitzvah, iyamad b'shlam chayvus gavahu hainum timechayve l'loika omi ela iyamrit chayvus talisu halo b'chayvo. The Gemara attempts to draw conclusions from the statements of the angel. He's talking to an angel, he's not talking to God. And the angel is saying, "We punish." And and he's saying, he's not. Maybe it's the angel of the Lord. Maybe this is talking to the angel of the Lord mentioned in Bereshis and these places. Maybe. This series we'll call I'll start a new series called "These Are the Questions." And they're from the Talmud, and they're about angels and God in relation to human beings and how the dialogue can go. The Gemara attempts to draw a conclusion to a statement of the angel. Granted, if you say at the midst of the ritual fringes, unless it was made up, unless it just, unless they're saying an angel, they're very liberal in their interpretation of what angel is. And angel could just mean, like if I have my own meandering, my own dwelling, my own inner thought process, and I talk to myself, one projection of myself could be called an angel. And when I talk to myself, there's me, there's Josh who's asking, and then there's the answer within my own mind, and I call that the angel. Maybe that's all an angel is here. We would never know. We would never know. If the Amora said, we're writing, Rav Katina or Rav Ashi or whoever's recording the story was writing this down, and Rav Katina, he had this meandering, he had this sort of meditation, this self-dialogue, and he was talking to himself, and he was thinking to himself, and then in his mind, he created this sort of avatar, right? And he called that avatar was just a projection of his own mind that was answering him. It was answering his own questions, but he called this the angel. I can see that right away. I can do that myself. I can say, watch this. I can say, all right, let's talk about this table. And this table has a blue tablecloth, and there's squares of dark blue and light blue. Why is that so? Okay, angel, why is that so? My son, I will tell you. Watch this. I'm hearing from the angel now. My son, I will tell you why the table has blue squares and light blue squares and dark blue squares, and why it's in the table. See, I just spoke with an angel right now. I heard from an angel, and I recorded that down, and bingo, I heard from an angel, and it went down in history. You would never know that that's not an angel. If it's written down that that's an angel, you would never know that it's not an angel. That angel explained to me the deep, mystical, Kabbalistic reasons why the tablecloth, this table that I'm looking at, is light blue and dark blue squares with different dots in it and different lines. And I just heard from an angel right now. Can you prove I didn't? Can you prove that I didn't? You can't prove it. Same thing here. This could be the same thing. That's what I'm wondering. You know what I mean? How could we prove that this just wasn't a projection of Rav Katina or whoever's writing the Gemara? Anyway, let's continue. The Gemara attempts to draw conclusions from the statement of an angel. Granted, if you say that the mitzvah of ritual fringes is an obligation incumbent upon the man, then why is Rav Katina? That is why Rav Katina would be deemed liable at the time of divine anger, as he did not affix ritual fringes to his cloak and thereby neglected the obligation incumbent upon him. But if you say that that is the obligation to attach them to every cloak that one owns, since Rav Katina's cloaks were not required to have ritual fringes, he was not obligated to attach ritual fringes to them. Why should he be punished in a time of divine anger? Okay. Elamai choivas gavrahu nidachai v'rachmonin ki mekase talis tevas chiyuvo ki mekase talis telabas chiyuvahi mi mechai v'rachmono. The Gemara responds, rather, what should one assume that it is an obligation incumbent upon the man? Even so, granted that the merciful one rendered him obligated when he is wearing a cloak that has four corners and is therefore subject to the obligation of ritual fringes, but when he is wearing a cloak that is not subject to the obligation of ritual fringes, did the merciful one deem him obligated? Ihachi kamalei tatzdike lemiftal nafshach mitzitzis. Rather, this is what the angel is saying to Rav Katina. Are you seeking ploys, like ways to exempt yourself from performing the mitzvah of ritual fringes? Amarav Tui Bar Kisna Amar Shmuel Klei Kufsa Chayav Mitzitzis Moide Shmuel Mizorkin Shiasla Chvoido Shebetur Amay Taima Asher Techase Bo Omar Mone Haylav Likasoye Avido. Rav Tovi Bar Kisna says that Shmuel says garments that are not being worn but are stored in a box are required to have ritual fringes because the mitzvah pertains to the garment, not to the man. But Shmuel concedes in the case of an old man where the garment was made as a shroud in his honor that the shroud is exempt. What is the reason for this? The merciful one states in the Torah, that one must place ritual fringes on the corners of garments with which you cover yourself. Deuteronomy 22:12. This shroud is not made for the purpose of covering oneself. The Gemara comments at that time, meaning a person's burial, we certainly affix ritual fringes to the shroud, but because otherwise it would be a violation of whoever mocks the poor blasphemes his maker, Proverbs 17:5. If we did not place them, it would be mocking the deceased, as if to taunt him that now he is no longer obligated in mitzvot. Amar Rachava, Amar Rav Yehuda, Talis shenikro chutz shalosh yispoyer toich shalosh lo yispoyer. Rachava says that Rav Yehuda says, in the case of a cloak that became torn at one of its corners, if it was torn beyond 3 finger breadths from the edge of the garment, one may sew it. But if it was torn within 3 finger breadths of the edge of the garment, then one may not sew it. There is a concern that he might use the thread with which he sewed the garment for the ritual fringes, in which case the strings would be unfit due to the principle prepare it and not from what has already been prepared. The Gemara comments, this halacha is also taught in the Braita in the case of a cloak that became torn at one of its corners. If it was torn beyond 3 finger breadths from the edge of the garment, one may sew it, but if it was torn within 3 finger breadths of the edge of the garment, Rabbi Meir says one may not sew it, and the rabbis say one may sew it. Let's continue on just to finish the idea. Continuing on to 41b. This right here is bilga. Beged lebeged, dilma hi belai. This is in the order of bilga. Like that. Yeah. That's very interesting. It's no tricone. Bilga is the 15th order, 15th division of the priestly division. This is bilga right here. Beged lebeged dilma is bilga. Dibelai. Okay, this is permitted provided the strings are not broken. Gemara asks, should one concede from this Braita that it is always permitted to untie ritual fringes from one garment in order to affix them to another garment? And Gemara rejects this inference. Perhaps the ruling of this Braita applies only if the first garment was worn out and no longer wearable. Okay? And Rabbi Meir and the rabbis agree that one may not bring a piece of cloth, even if it is square, cubit in size from elsewhere, containing white and sky blue strings, and attach it to a cloak. This is because one must attach the ritual fringes directly to the corner of the garment, rather than attaching them to a piece of cloth, and then attaching that cloth to the garment. And Rabbi Meir and the rabbis also agree that one may bring white or sky blue strings from elsewhere and attach them to the garment, meaning one may remove the strings from one garment in order to attach them to another garment. Turning to 41b, this is permitted provided that the strings are not broken. The Gemara asks, should one conclude from this Braita that it is always permitted to untie ritual fringes from one garment in order to affix them to another garment? The Gemara rejects this inference. Perhaps the ruling of this Braita applies only if the first garment was worn out and no longer wearable.